Welcome once again, everybody. It's Cannabis News. I'm your host, Joe Klare. It's June 25th, 2019. The show, as always, is presented by the Marijuana Times. MarijuanaTimes.org is where you can find us. Click the video tab for this show. A bunch of great articles as well from a lot of great writers. Social media links and more. MarijuanaTimes.org. Go check it, yo. Coming up today, what does the historic congressional vote last week mean going forward? Also, the Ohio Attorney General has a problem with the new Cincinnati decriminalization measure, and Oregon lawmakers signed two laws, or get two laws passed that will alleviate, or supposed to alleviate, the surplus we talked about a couple weeks ago when it comes to cannabis in Oregon. Lot of weed in Oregon. All that's coming up. First, of course, Cannabis News is brought to you by Natureside, nature-side.com, and their organic, all-natural pesticides. Make sure you grow safe and poison-free. Don't use harmful chemicals on what you are growing. Don't use banned pesticides in the state that you're growing in. You can accomplish all of these things with Natureside. Nature-side.com, a proud sponsor of Cannabis News. They're awesome. Go check them out. First story by yours truly at MarijuanaTimes.org. What does the historic congressional marijuana vote mean? You may remember last week, the amendment that will protect not only now medical marijuana businesses, state legal medical marijuana businesses, but state legal adult use recreational businesses as well from the federal government using taxpayer funds to go after them. Passed 267 to 165. It was June 20th, to be more precise, when the vote came down. And it's a big vote for many reasons. First of all, it's the first time that the House has come together as a whole and voted on and passed a marijuana law reform measure. Matthew Schweiss, Deputy Director of the Marijuana Policy Project, told the Marijuana Times, quote, "The historic House vote signifies that the end of prohibition at the federal level is a question of when, not if. The passage of the Blumenauer-McClintock-Norton Amendment, as it was now known, used to be the Rohrabacher-Farr Amendment, demonstrates, well, that's what covered medical marijuana, now it covers medical and adult use, as I said. The amendment demonstrates that sustained pressure on Congress to address the conflict between state and federal cannabis laws has yielded results. We now face a significant hurdle in the Senate. We must maintain our advocacy efforts in order to see the federal cannabis reform through to its conclusion." What the Senate's going to do, who knows? Obviously, the House, there's a lot more legislation they need to pass, or at least to get to a vote on the House floor. Still a lot of work ahead of them. The Senate, you have no idea what's going to happen in the Republican-controlled Senate, but there are some states' rights senators on the GOP side in the Senate. But there's also some Democratic senators that are kind of old and not too keen on the whole hippie marijuana scene, if you want to put it that way. And then what happens when it gets to Trump? That's a coin flip. Who knows? It depends on what Trump feels like that day, probably. So there's a long road to go, but right now, the House, and there's supposedly more legislation coming down the pipe to be voted on the House floor. That's what needs to happen. The House needs to get these things passed and push them to the Senate and put pressure on the Senate to either do something about them or ignore them at their peril. Marijuana uses, or marijuana legalization rather, is popular in most states, and most of the states that these senators are in. So it's a good way for political opponents to put pressure on these lawmakers if they're not going to do what needs to be done in terms of the U.S. Senate passing marijuana law reform. We'll see. You never know. Like I said, and then if something gets to Trump's desk, well, then all bets are off. We'll just have to cross our fingers and wait and hope, because you don't know. He may tweet out that weed is the greatest thing in the world. He may say, "I just smoked a blunt when I signed the Marijuana Law Reform Act. It was terrific. It was fantastic. It was the best blunt ever. I only smoke the best blunts ever." Or he may veto it and say, "I hate marijuana smokers, and I'm going to start detaining them any chance I get." There's really a wide range of reactions we could get from Trump. But to get a reaction from him, got to get it out of the House, got to get it through the Senate, got to get it to the president's desk. Get. This is the international symbol of get going. This next story. I'm going to move on. WCPO.com out of Cincinnati. Ohio Attorney General Dave Yost blasts Cincinnati's new marijuana ordinance. The evil decriminalization ordinance. Ohio's Attorney General blasted Cincinnati's new marijuana ordinance as useless, saying council members were pandering for votes and showed disrespect and arrogance for state law. Attorney General Dave Yost rebuked the city council's majority vote in an interview with WCPO anchor Craig McPhee for WCPO's weekly Sunday news program this week in Cincinnati. Council voted 5-3 to decriminalize possession of up to 100 grams. The law takes effect 30 days after the vote. Yost said state law doesn't allow anybody to be arrested for possession of up to 100 grams anyway, and the maximum fine for having that amount is $150. These laws are symbolic. They're not going to create any new cause of action, Yost said, but it shows a disrespect for law and an arrogance on the part of legislators in the city that want to wrest away from the state the responsibility for making laws. First of all, don't cities also make laws? I've never heard the notion that cities weren't allowed to make laws and all lawmaking abilities rest with the state. So that's stupid and not true. But a maximum fine under state law is $150, and there's no fine under the Cincinnati decriminalization ordinance. I wouldn't call that useless. I think most people, if they save $150 for any reason, it's not useless. But saving it when they're not harming anyone and not having it taken from them forcibly by the city or by the state, in this case, it's not useless. That's not symbolic. $150 is not symbolic. It's $150. Now, maybe if you don't need $150, actually, obviously the utility of that is if you have a lot more money, that $150 isn't a big deal to you. The utility and what you want to do with that $150 is low. But if $150 is a big deal to you, then it's not symbolic, it's not useless, and I would dare say that most people fall in the latter category, where $150 is something that is useful, not useless. Not symbolic, but unsymbolic, if you will. Anyway, the administration, Attorney General, Ohio Governor DeWine, they're not cannabis friendly. Let's put it that way. Not in the least. So whatever gets done in Ohio at this point is pretty good considering the kind of hard road that it had to fight through the legislature and the governor's office and all that stuff. So good for you, Cincinnati. Shut up, Dave Yost. Nobody asked you. It's the last story from FoxNews.com. Oregon lawmakers signed 2 laws to deal with massive marijuana surplus. Of course, we talked about the surplus a couple weeks ago, and I told you what needs to happen. Senate Bill 218 hands the Oregon Liquor Control Board more authority in issuing new licenses to growers based on supply and demand for weed, while Senate Bill 582 lays the groundwork to eventually allow the governor to enter into agreements with other states for the importing and exporting of marijuana. As I said at the time we talked about the surplus, there's really 2 solutions. One is to bus in and relocate a bunch of cannabis consumers into Oregon so they can buy the surplus marijuana. Or an easier route is to allow Oregon growers to sell their marijuana in other places that aren't Oregon. Right now, that's not possible. You can't transport across state lines. Marijuana is federally illegal. You know all of these things. You know what a pain in the rear end federal law is when it comes to this. But as Adam J. Smith, founder and director of the Craft Cannabis Alliance based in Oregon, he said to the Los Angeles Times, quote, "You have people using water in the desert in Nevada to grow mediocre cannabis, or in Florida where they have to dehumidify giant spaces, consuming twice the energy. Oregon wouldn't have an oversupply problem if we could access legal markets like these." It's very simple. And somebody, when I talked about this on a YouTube comment, took issue with that and said, no, marijuana grown in Oregon should be bought by Oregonians and it all should stay in Oregon. No, that's economic suicide. And a lot of growers in Oregon are paying for it because they can't take their marijuana to anywhere else in the United States and sell it to the person who's going to give them the most money. That's what needs to happen. Growers in Oregon need to be able to take their product. If they can't sell it in Oregon because prices are so low, because supply is so high, and there's such a surplus, they take it to other states where there's not a surplus, where demand maybe relative to the supply is a little higher, they can get better money for it. That's what needs to happen. That's the only way to get rid of the surplus. As I said, short of bussing in a couple 100,000 cannabis consumers and relocating them in Oregon, it really sounds like it would be difficult and expensive, but what they could do is just allow them to sell in other states like every other business, commodity, product in the country are allowed to do. But again, federal law prevents this, but at least in this case, Oregon has now passed a law that says, well, if federal law changes, then if we want to enter into agreements with other states, I'm sure it's still going to be a very complicated process, but it'll be a lot better than what's going on right now. And we'll see what happens. We'll continue to update you on all these stories right here on Cannabis News. Search the Marijuana Times on YouTube, Vimeo, and Apple Podcasts. The first two places you can find video, the last place audio only. Also the video tab at marijuanatimes.org, as I mentioned. Thank you to Natureside, nature-side.com, and their organic, all-natural pesticides. Thank you all for watching and listening, likening the videos, sharing, commenting, all the things you do to help spread the truth about cannabis with this show. Thank you. Thank you for watching and listening today, and we'll see you next time right here on Cannabis News.